Beckett Cook I was raised in Dallas, Texas, born and raised, and the youngest of 8 kids in a large Catholic family. And, at a very young age in elementary school, began to realize that I was attracted to the same sex, which was very much forbidden in that time, according to my family, my church, the church, and my peers. That was very much frowned upon in Dallas. So I had to keep it a deep, dark secret for a very long time. And then in high school, I ended up becoming best friends with someone who was also going through the same thing, and we came out to each other. And that was a big turning point for me. When I was, I think, 9 years old, I spent the night at a friend's house, and in the middle of the night, I woke up to his father molesting me, which was very scary. And
Oh, sure.
what's interesting about that is I never thought it, because I didn't want that experience to be a part of my identity as a gay man. So I pretended for many, many years that night it was no big deal, had nothing to do with anything. But obviously now I look back on that and I see how powerful and damaging that night was to me, and not just in sexuality, but in a lot of other ways.
My earliest memory about just having gender confusion and such is probably around first grade, first or second. I just distinctly remember wanting to be a boy, wanting to be the dominant role in any type of relationship. My aunt, I think I went to church with her pretty much every Sunday for the first 9-ish years of my life. And I just distinctly remember things like when people would get mad at her, she would not respond. So seeing her life and always hearing about Jesus and hearing about God, it gave me really early convictions about who he was early. I was always attracted to women. I just didn't acknowledge it because I knew it was wrong. It was just kind of this underlying temptation. 17 was probably when that became more of an attraction to me than men. I was at a homecoming dance at another high school, and this young lady that I knew, she flirted with me. And that was the first time a woman ever flirted with me. It felt natural. That's honestly the best way I could describe it. I was like, this is what I want. Gay clubs, I found interest in those really quickly. Gay pride parades. I was having fun, but a deep soul satisfaction, I didn't have that. I used to tell my girlfriends the truth. I was like, hey, this is sin, right? They were like, why are you gay? I was like, I don't know. But I know this is not right. To know so much about the truth about God and then to continue to live contrary to it, I was always in this constant state of conviction.
Well, we started to, I was 15 years old, going to gay bars in Dallas and, going to nightclubs. And I remember going to this nightclub in Dallas that was, it was called the Stark Club, designed by Philippe Stark, the famous French designer. And I walked in, and there were straight people, gay people, drag queens, and it was just like this whole, it was like Studio 54 kind of vibe.
Right.
And I just remember walking in as a 15-year-old and just thinking, wow, these are my people.
Connection.
I felt a connection to these people because they were all kind of like the misfits, so to speak.
Sure.
And even though I was popular in school and I had went steady with girls, this is where I really felt at home and at ease. Yeah. It just kind of progressed. And in college, again, I befriended someone who was gay. We came out to each other. And then again, we just, went to gay bars together. But in college and in high school, I was still in the closet, and no one really knew.
So your family didn't know at this point?
They probably, I don't know, they probably had an inkling. I don't know.
Suspected it, but no one had ever asked you, hey, to this point, no one
had ever asked me. And so I had like a few friends who knew, and then after college was when I really came out completely. Because I met my first boyfriend.
But what happened?
Fortunately, my sister did all the talking. My sister had written me a letter while I was in Tokyo asking me if I was gay, and I wrote her back and I said yes, blah blah blah, and I explained everything to her. But I said, please wait till I get back to Dallas. Don't tell mom and dad because I'll tell them. But of course, she told them immediately. So by the time I got home, months later, everyone in my family knew. So that was kind of actually easier on me because I didn't have to be like, Mom, Dad, I have to tell you something.
Right, at least that was expressed. But I'm sure it still had issues connected to it.
Yeah, but what's interesting is my parents, my siblings didn't really react to it. They were all kind of older, I was the youngest, so they were all sort of living their own lives and married and had kids, and I didn't really interact with them about this issue. But my parents were very lovely about it. They were so gracious and loving to me. And part of it could have been the fact that I was the youngest of 8 kids and they had just been through so many things.
Right, it's the end of the line.
So they were just, my mother cried, and she was crying at the kitchen table one night. I walked in and she said, I heard you're homosexual. And I'm like, Mom, it's okay. Don't worry. This is who I am. It's not a big deal. And then my dad came up to me a couple days later and said, "Hey, Beck, like, are you angry at me for anything as a,
Good
being
questions.
a father? Like, did I do anything wrong?" And I'm like, "No, Dad, this is not your fault. This is," again, I was just like, this is who I am. This is not a big deal. And so I tried to sort of minimize it to them. And they, over the years, were just super loving to me and never condemning. I mean, they definitely believed it was wrong and it was a sin.
Well, I was going to ask where they were at spiritually, the family and how,
All my siblings were believers and are believers, and my parents were too, like born again believers. And they all, my siblings, I think it kind of was jarring to my siblings a little bit that I was gay, but my parents seemed to take it in stride. I don't know what they said to each other behind closed doors, but to me, they were just always very loving. And my father, over the years, was, every time we talk on the phone from LA to Dallas, he would just be super loving to me.
Yeah, well, let's pick it up. So you come back from Tokyo. You eventually do move to Los Angeles.
Yes. So I moved out to LA, and I immediately got into this great group of friends who had all gone to college on the East Coast at Brown University and Princeton, because my closest friends from high school went there. And so when everyone migrated out to LA, and I suddenly had this huge group of friends they were all just hilarious, smart, funny, super ambitious. And so I got into this crowd of friends, and we kind of like lived the life in LA. I mean, we went to premieres every week, movie premieres, and the Oscars, the Emmys, the Golden Globes, all the after parties. And I met everyone, and all my friends ended up becoming very famous in their field. I had best friends who became famous actresses. They basically run Hollywood now.
Right.
All those old friends.
In that context, I think that's a good place for the question of the longing that you felt. What was happening there? I mean, with the friendships that I have in the homosexual community, one of the things that we'll often talk about is the fact that even gay marriage now doesn't fill that void like they thought it would.
Right.
Getting societal acceptance. This will be it. If we can get this, then I'll feel complete. And it's not there.
Yeah, I mean, I was so much, I was having so much fun for about 10 plus years that I didn't really, of course, at the back of my mind, I wanted to know the meaning of life, like everyone
But you're
does.
in your 20s.
But yeah, God was never an option for me because I was gay. And so I knew that I could never be a part of that club, the Christian club, because I was gay. So, but the weight of postmodern relativism really started to bear down on me after about 10 years of kind of this pleasure life that I was living.
Well, define that for us, some that may not be catching that. What did that mean for you, the postmodern life?
Well, in postmodern relativism, everything's subjective. There's no objective truth. So you don't really know what's up, what's down, what's right, what's wrong, what's left, what's right. You're just kind of like in this state of almost existential angst, and that is sustainable for a while, but after a while it just becomes unbearable. It's like, well, there's got to be some objective truth. I can't just, not knowing whatever I do is right. I mean, I kind of knew, when I was like just going through a series of boyfriends and a series of casual one night stands, like I sensed that it was empty for sure, but I also sensed that there was something off about it, and I didn't know how to explain that because I was in a postmodern world where everything was feelings based and subjective, and so that was tough to deal with. But again, I was so distracted by the shiny objects in Hollywood that it distracted me for a long time.
Yeah.
I was 19. I was in my room. It was as if every thought I had was just interrupted by this really strong thought that convicted me all at the same time. And it felt as if God was showing me that the sins that I loved and were in would kill me. I would die and go to hell. It's a heavy weight to know that you're a sinner and God is holy. But if that's in the Bible and that's considered true, then the other truths in the Bible about Jesus being God, Jesus being Savior, Jesus being willing to forgive those who turn from their sins, these are both true. And so I just need to believe this. It was really that simple. In my mind, I just kind of had this conversation with God. Like, I don't really want to be straight. Like, I equated salvation with just being heterosexual overnight. And so it was just like, I don't want to be straight. But then I felt like God was leading me to the fact, like, I can change your desires. I can give you the desire for a man. Surely I'm God. And then I just considered everything I loved and its consequences. Like, I really weighed the cost. Yeah, I really saw that I was holistically sinful. This one area just didn't need Jesus. All of me was messed up. Homosexuality is not the only issue plaguing a person. Sin is the issue plaguing a person. This homosexuality is just an outworking of that nature. I just saw like weed and stealing and pride and anger and arrogance and drunkenness, and everything was not worth it. Like, it just was overwhelmingly obvious that everything that I loved would not profit me anything but hell. You know what I'm saying? And I saw that God was offering me life, and I knew I had no choice. I either choose God or I choose death. I told God, I said, what you're calling me to do, I cannot do on my own. I've tried before to try to live holy, and it didn't work. But I know enough about you to know that you'll help me. And so I broke up with my girlfriend maybe a day or two later, because I had to. And then that was one of the hardest decisions I had to make. But so everything after that was easy. Changed my clothes a week later, got into a church in 2 weeks. Returning to church was cool. They were like really loving people. It was like a family. It was very difficult the first 2 years. Like, God kept me. I think he kept me because I had a community around me. If I did not have Christians around me to help me and pour into me and encourage me, I would have been doomed for the most part. Who God says I am defines me, though I may have temptations, though I may have struggles, though I may see a woman that's beautiful and be tempted. Like, I have temptations to curse people out too. I have temptations to get drunk. I have temptations to watch porn, but that's just the human experience. The Christian is not void of temptation. The temptation got less powerful over time, just as I grew in knowing and loving Jesus. But in that place, I didn't want a relationship with a man either. But over time, probably 3 or so years into my walk is when I started to get an attraction towards Preston. It was weird because it wasn't, I'm attracted to this man. It was like, I'm just attracted to him and all that he is. And he just happens to be a man. And so because I'm attracted to him, I'm more than willing to love his masculinity too. I think on my wedding day, it was just kind of surreal. Everything in my life has always just been so God. You desire for this marriage and this wedding to just really show off your gospel. And I'm really grateful to be a part of that presentation. 5 weeks after my honeymoon, I found out I was pregnant. I was looking at her, and I thought to myself, if I chose to stay in the lifestyle I was in, I would never have her. I wouldn't have her. It wouldn't be Eden. And I just cried and thanked God for allowing me to experience that. The advice I would give to a parent is, first and foremost, to really trust God. Because even with my mother or my aunt, so the Christians around me, they may have seen me in my condition and think, oh, it's hopeless. But they didn't know that I was running into people on the street that were convicting me. They didn't know I was seeing certain commercials that were reminding me of God. They didn't know that I would hear certain gospel songs randomly. Just be faithful, keep loving them. God changed me by showing me himself. God is aware of what's happening. It's not foreign to him. His son died for them. He loves your children more than you do.
Beckett, September 2009 was a turning point in your life. I mean, I think that is what you say in the book. Something happened. Tell us how that unfolded.
Well, briefly, 6 months prior to that, I was at Paris Fashion Week. I used to go to Fashion Weeks in New York and Paris, and I was at Paris Fashion Week. Kanye West was there that week. And I went to a bunch of the shows, a bunch of the after parties. And one night I was at an after party, and everyone was there from the fashion world, dancing, drinking champagne, having the times of their lives, allegedly. And I'm standing there, and I just had this sudden, overwhelming moment of, this isn't it. Like, and I felt so empty.
So you're soaking in the scene, you're looking at everybody.
Yeah, and I'm like, this stuff can't sustain me anymore. Like, this has worked for the last many years, since high school, really.
Right.
But this is not going to sustain me anymore, and I don't know what is. And again, God's not an option. And so I went back to my hotel room that night in Paris, and I just was up all night in a panic about what am I going to do for the rest of my life? I can't just go on going to parties and going to this thing and that thing, and I need some purpose and like a meaning in life. And so 6 months later, I was back in LA. I came back to LA after Paris, and then 6 months later, I was at a coffee shop in LA, and I was with my best friend who was gay as well, and we were chatting, doing our usual weekend thing, brunch, shopping, which is like gay church. And then we go to this coffee shop, and we're chatting, and we suddenly see a table next to us with a group of people, young people with Bibles on the table, which
Right.
was shocking to see. I had never seen a Bible in public in LA.
Yeah,
in my life.
interesting.
So that was, and we both looked at each other, my friend and I, and we were just like, what are they doing? And then they bowed their heads and prayed, which was even more scary. We thought,
Right.
are they going, is this like a cult? Are they going to Jonestown, Guyana? Like what's happening? Is this a cult?
Right.
There, there's a Scientology buildings right there. Like, are they going to, anyway, so we were shocked, but I was half intrigued. I was intrigued by them because of the 6 months before
Right.
Night in Paris.
So it wasn't totally off-putting.
No, because I was at that point I was open to hearing something
Amazing.
else.
Amazing.
And so I turned to them. It's like a Christian's fantasy. I turned to them and I'm like, "Hey, so are you guys Christians?" And they said yes. And we got into this conversation. And I said, "Well, I grew up Catholic. I don't really remember. Tell me what you believe. Just tell me what your faith
Wow,
is."
that's amazing. They must
Yeah.
have been shocked too.
I think so. And they were very capable, and they knew their stuff. And they told me, the gospel. They told me what they believed, and of course, after about an hour of this we got into it was a lively conversation. And after about an hour of this, I said, "Well, what does your church in Hollywood believe about homosexuality?" And they said, "Well, we believe it's a sin." And I said, "Oh, okay," because I was a practical atheist at that point in my life.
You'd moved to that point.
I just thought it was all a fairy tale. It was all nonsense. And then, so I had this moment of, okay, there's this tiny, slim chance that God is real. And if God is real, there may be a tinier chance that homosexuality is wrong. And what if I've built my entire life on a false foundation and I don't know it? And then, so we got into this, and then they invited me to their church the following Sunday.
and you went.
I went.
This is amazing.
Reluctantly. I didn't think I was going to go, or I didn't know I was going to go. But
Right.
the following Sunday, I woke up and I was like, I guess I'm going to church today. And
It
so
probably felt like an out-of-body experience. a
it
little
was.
bit. Like,
It felt
what are my
like-
legs
it,
doing
It
here?
felt like I was in a Tesla, like a self-driving car that just drove me
Taking
to
you to church.
Yeah. And so I get to this high school auditorium where it meets in Hollywood on Sunset Boulevard, and I walk in by myself because the people who invited me, I don't even know where they were, but I walked in, and I hear Christian worship music, and I immediately cringe because I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot Christian music existed. And then I was like, wait, it's not bad. Actually, I like it. So I found my seat near the front. I sat by myself. The pastor comes out and he preaches for an hour and he's in the middle of a 2-year series on Romans. So he's on Romans 7, chapter 7. And he's preaching, and while he's preaching, every word, every sentence he's saying is resonating as truth in my mind and my heart, and I have no idea why. I'm just like, I'm literally, my mouth is agape. I'm on the edge of my seat, and I'm like, this is the gospel? Like, this is turning everything I believe religion was on its head. And it was the first time I really understood and heard the gospel in my life. And I was like, wow, this is good news. And I didn't want him to stop preaching. I was just like, please continue, just keep talking. But he stopped, and then he left the stage, and he said, there's people on the side of the church from the prayer ministry. If you need prayer for anything, you can get prayed for. So I had this moment of like, and then the worship music comes on, and so I had this moment of like, should I go over there and get prayed for? If I do, it could be humiliating. People might be watching me here, So anyway, I just was like, I'm here. I'm going to do this. So I walked over to this random guy, not random guy, but I walked over to this guy and I
Seemingly
said,
random.
seemingly random. And I said, again, a Christian's fantasy. I said, hey, I don't know what I believe, but I'm here. And he was like, let me pray for you.
Yeah.
And he prayed for me. And it seemed powerful. It seemed so powerful. And I thought, how does this random straight dude love me so much? Because his prayer was so loving and caring. And I walk back to my seat and I sit down, and everyone else is standing and singing worship music for the next 25 minutes. And I sit down, and about 30 seconds later, all of a sudden, the Holy Spirit just like floods me, and the scales from my eyes just fall. And
What did that feel
oh
like?
my gosh, it felt like Isaiah in the temple when he sees God's holiness and he comes undone. I mean, God revealed himself to me in a split second, and he was like, I'm God, Jesus is my son, heaven's real, hell's real, the Bible's true, and you're now adopted into my kingdom. And I just started bawling. And it was encountering Jesus that day it was like you sitting right there. It was like that real. And it was like a road to Damascus moment. And I was crying for the next 25 minutes, harder than I've ever cried in my life, just crying.
It's so
and crying,
beautiful
crying.
the way your story unfolds that way. I mean, that's something.
Yeah, and it was so powerful that God just was so clear, to
Yeah.
me in that moment. And then I get home right after the service. I just went straight home to take a nap because I was so just overwhelmed. I get into bed and God's like, it was like Moses in the cleft of the rock. God's like, let me show you a little more of my glory. And I'm just like overwhelmed with his presence again. And I jump out of bed, bawling again, crying again. I'm just like, God, you have my whole life. I am done. It's yours.
Yeah.
And I knew in that moment, I knew homosexuality was wrong. I knew it was a sin. I knew it was no longer who I was. It wasn't my identity. I knew it was my old self, and that I knew that dating guys was not a part of my future. But I didn't care at all because I was like, this guy Jesus is way better than those guys. I'm gonna go with him.
Well, that hole in your heart was
Oh,
filled,
it
right?
was like filled beyond. I mean, it was filled so much that I couldn't. It was overflowing for like a year. I was crying every time I would wake up. I would just start crying.